All right, welcome to TIDC's LAR discussion. Before we start, I did want to let folks know that because TIDC conducts its meetings under the Open Meetings Act, today's meeting will be conducted like all of our virtual or hybrid meetings, which means that it's going to be live streamed today as well as recorded on YouTube. So if you wanted to go back and watch it, it will be available for you. I wanted to give Jim Bethke and Judge Woolley an opportunity to introduce themselves. I don't know, Judge Keller, do we have enough? You think everyone should introduce themselves or just the newbies?
I'm going to leave that up to you. You decide.
Since we've got a couple of new folks, why don't everybody introduce themselves? I'll start with the new folks. And if you can just quickly introduce yourselves for them, that will let them know who you are. So Jim, why don't you start things off?
Hello, everyone. It's kind of good to be back. I'm Jim Bethke, the director of the Bexar County Managed Assigned Counsel System.
Judge Woolley?
I'm Judge J.R. Woolley. I'm the Justice of the Peace in Waller County, and I run around all over Texas teaching people about magistrations and inquests. So I'm excited to be here, and hopefully we can continue protecting our citizens' constitutional rights.
Thank you, Judge Woolley. So yeah, as you may recall, Judge Woolley and Jim Bethke are filling the two seats that came about from legislation that was passed last session that put a magistrate judge on the board, as well as a member who is a MAC director or an expert in indigent defense. I guess we got 2-for-1 on that one because I consider Jim both an expert as well as a MAC director. So glad y'all could join us and are now on the board. Judge Mederi, why don't you quickly introduce yourself for the new folks?
Hi guys, welcome. My name is Missy Mederi. I am a district judge down in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was put on this board in 2019. And so I just want to say welcome, everybody. Looking forward to working with you all.
Judge Torres?
I'm Vivian Torres, and I'm a retired county court at law judge out of Medina County. And I've been working with this organization before it was a commission, and I'm glad to see Jim is back.
Mr. Cohen?
Hi, I'm Jay Cohen. I guess I'm no longer the new person. And I'm out of Houston, and I'm a defense lawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Let's see, Mr. Bunnan.
Hey, I'm Alex Bunnan, Chief Public Defender for Harris County, Texas.
Commissioner Covey.
Hi, I'm Valerie Covey, and I am the County Commissioner, Precinct 3 in Williamson County.
And we got Judge, introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Sharon Keller.
Judge Evans, I apologize.
Oh, Judge Evans, okay.
Richard Evans, Bandera County Judge. Been on the commission when Bethke was supposed to be heading it, so I guess he's back to try again to give us guidance. So good to see Jim back.
And Judge Keller, I apologize.
No, that's fine. I'm Sharon Keller. I'm the presiding judge of the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals.
All right, well, welcome all. We're looking forward to our presentation today on all things TIDC's legislative appropriation request for FY 26 and 27. Could you share the screen, Kristen? All right, next slide. So here's where we're going to go today. We're going to give you a little background on the LAR process, talk a bit about the timelines, let you know what decisions you need to make today and on Friday, talk a bit about some of the major issues TIDC and Texas are facing. We have a presentation today from Dr. George Nafal from the Public Policy Research Institute at Texas A&M about the Rural Public Defense Needs Assessment they did for us at the direction of the legislature. And that's going to tie into our LAR request. We're then going to go into our proposed LAR exceptional items and then move on to next steps. Next. So in terms of background, as a reminder for many of you, even number years, the state government entities have to submit their legislative appropriations request to the Legislative Budget Board for their next 2 years of operations. And so as a little background, in 2011, legislation was enacted to authorize TIDC to submit a separate LAR from the Office of Court Administration. So we actually go up to the LBB all on our own. I mean, it's at the same, right after OCA, but we provide our own LAR, and we have our own separate budget from them. And so that happened in 2011. And then one of the terms that you'll be hearing that's very important is exceptional items. And these are the requests that we will be making that go beyond the base budget. At this point, we have not received a base budget from the LBB. We're hoping to get that here in the next few weeks. So it's theoretically possible we may, need to ask for, something a little beyond what we're talking about here today if the base budget doesn't come in where we're at. But assuming the base budget is, along the lines of what we got last time, then we're really talking about the exceptional items that need to go beyond where we're at today. Next. So on August 2nd, TIDC must submit our LAR to the LBB, and in September and October, the LAR is presented to the LBB and state leadership staff. In January, our LAR amendments can be submitted if necessary. January, February, the Senate and House file their budget bills, start having hearings through March. And then one other thing that I thought y'all should know about, due to some of the budget shortfalls that we've shared some information with you in the past few weeks, there is a supplemental appropriations bill that's going to be introduced to address budget shortfalls for agencies. And so I was planning to reach out to Senate Finance and House Appropriations. I mean, Senate Finance already knows about our shortfall. The Lieutenant Governor's Office already knows about our shortfall. The Governor's Office knows about our shortfall. But I'm going to start working to try to get TIDC's budget shortfall included in that supplemental appropriations bill. So in terms of decisions y'all need to make today, you need to decide on the exceptional items to include in the LAR, or give us a little direction on what to work on between now and Friday. And Friday is when you'll finalize and vote on the exceptional items to include in the LAR. We need to front load this a bit because, as I mentioned, the LAR is due to the LBB on August 2nd, and your next meeting is not until the end of August. We got to make decisions now in order to meet that August 2nd deadline for the LBB. So these are the major issues that we thought y'all should be aware of. You're probably aware of many of them already, but these are basically the highlights we thought were in terms of major issues facing TIDC in Texas. First off, the legislature authorized TIDC to work on family protection representation last session through SB 2120, but no funds were appropriated to really fund that work. And so that's one issue that TIDC is facing. The state is facing major shortages of indigent defense attorneys. That includes criminal, juvenile delinquency, and family protection representation, primarily in rural Texas, but really in many parts of non-rural Texas as well. This is true. We'll get into this more, but we've recently discovered some significant shortfalls in our revenue collections into the Fair Defense account. And so we feel like we need more reliable sources of income. TIDC has some staffing needs to make the above actionable. And then we'll talk a bit about Operation Lone Star. So I think now we're going to go straight into the public defense needs assessment that, as I mentioned, the Public Policy Research Institute conducted for TIDC over the winter and spring. And we're on the verge of finalizing that report. I think the plan will be, if George can get us a draft for y'all to review, I think we'll give that to y'all for the June board meeting and let you review it, think on it, and we'll, finalize it at the August board meeting. So, George, why don't you talk a bit about y'all's research?
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is George Nafal, and I'm a researcher at the Public Policy Research Institute. And today I'm going to be presenting findings from a report on the needs assessment of public defense called Justice Beyond the Cities, the State of Public Defense in Texas. With that in mind, as Scott mentioned, the request for this study came as part of a budget rider in the General Appropriation Act for the 2024-2025 biennium. And we set up to review the needs of public defense across rural counties in Texas. We defined a rural county to be a county with a population less than 100,000. That allowed us to find 214 counties out of the 254 that fits this criteria. So that's about 84% of all counties. Now, even within that criteria, there's a lot of differences across counties. You have counties with less than 5,000, counties with 5,000 to 25,000 in terms of population, and so on and so forth. And that figure on the graph shows the diversity within the rural community in Texas. The study relied on multiple mixed methods approach. We devised an online survey that ran between October 24, 2023 to February 12, 2024. And that survey reached basically across all counties. We were able to receive more than 700 completed responses, which 431 were from rural counties. And the distribution of responses by role, as the graph shows, is actually good in the sense that we were able to reach all different stakeholders related and involved in indigent defense. At the end of the survey, we also asked only 3, by the way, regarding the survey, only 3 counties where we could not get responses from, which were Brooks, Lamar, and Loving. So we were able to get all counties, all rural counties except 3. At the end of the survey, we asked respondents if they'd be interested in having a virtual interview or a chat with us to further explore some of the questions on indigent defense. And we had about 120 who expressed interest, but we were able to schedule and complete 48, 21 of which were from rural counties. And then we supplemented all of this through also macro level data, which we looked at to help us look at trends on indigent defense. We looked at data from the State Bar, from the TIDC database, from the Office of Court Administration, and the Texas Commission on Jail Standards. The main question we wanted to ask respondents is, tell us about indigent defense in your area. So we asked them, what are the challenges that you are seeing? And from this graph, you can see immediately that availability of attorneys was the #1 challenge that everybody talked about. More than 71% believe that this is a very significant challenge. In fact, in most cases, as we will talk about that in a second in the interviews, that's the only thing stakeholders wanted to talk about. Yes, there were some concerns about quality of representation, quality of resources, as the graph shows, and the availability of resources. But ultimately, most of them said, find me an attorney, and then I'll worry about other things. The second challenge that most of stakeholders mentioned was cost. About 67% found that to be significant. Once we got those kind of feedback, we started looking at the attorney availability, and we found that there is an actual crisis across indigent defense and public defense in Texas. So, for instance, across time over the last 8 years, the number of attorneys taking at least one indigent defense case has declined, both for rural counties and mid-sized and urban counties, meaning non-rural. For rural specifically, that number went from about 1,900 in 2014 to about 1,400 in 2022. That's a 27% drop. A more significant drop is also seen in mid-sized and urban, going from more than 4,000 to about 3,500 attorneys. The second thing that we also focus on is when we talk to stakeholders, we said, tell us about indigent, attorneys taking indigent defense cases. And they said, well, they're just older. Most of them are in their 50s and 60s. And actually, several of the stakeholders said that they don't even know anybody in their 30s and 40s. In fact, once we got that feedback from the virtual interviews, we went back and looked at the average number of years since receiving a law license. And for those attorneys taking indigent defense cases, that's 21 years. That's the average number of years since getting a law license. Now, on the positive side, that means that, experience, but on the other side, that means it matches what stakeholders are telling us, that few attorneys are entering public defense, especially new attorneys are entering public defense. Then the third component is for those who are actually taking indigent defense cases, those attorneys are actually overburdened. Those two graphs shows 2014, a snapshot of 2014 and 2022 in terms of percentage of attorneys who are overburdened. And you can see the one in 2022 is a lot darker, suggesting 20% or greater of attorneys are overburdened, those who are taking indigent defense cases. In fact, it's on average 1 out of 4 attorneys is overburdened. And that percentage increased from 15% over the years. So it's trending upward rather than downward or stable. So then we asked in the survey, for those counties that have a public defender office, how well does your PD office address the challenges that we just discussed? So the left panel suggests that 67% of those who have a public defender office mentioned that they feel that the PD office does address availability of attorney well, and they are satisfied with that the way that PD office addressed this. And in fact, if you look across the different challenges, you could see that the PD office seems to be doing a good job addressing most of them. Now, I want to mention that the neither, sometimes, we talk to so many stakeholders, like a treasurer, an auditor, a private attorney, and so on and so forth. They may not be aware how a PD office is addressing those issues. But I want to, raise your attention to this dissatisfied, which is basically the bluish portion, and then compare it to the right panel. The right panel is, we ask counties that do not have a PD office, how well would the PD office improve those issues? And if you look at those blue, it's basically almost the same to the one on the left. And the majority also, almost 60% believe a county without a PD office would benefit from a PD office in addressing availability of attorneys. Taking those into consideration and the information that we found, we built a set of recommendations that I'm going to actually summarize in the next few slides. The first recommendation that we believe is crucial is we need to develop, there has to be a comprehensive program to increase the number of attorneys representing indigent defendants. TIDC should be leading this program, working with, in collaboration with other public defender offices, law schools, whether they're within the state or even outside the state. And that program should include perhaps loan repayment, internship and fellowship opportunities for law school students, webinars, resource sharing, but also perhaps, recruitment campaigns across rural counties for high school students who, eventually may come back to where they grew up. That's something we heard a lot from the stakeholders. And I want to mention that this program should have an evaluation component to be able to find and, identify which avenues will seem to be the most successful in increasing the number of indigent defense attorneys. The second recommendation is, based on what we heard from counties with PD offices and without PD offices, it seems that there is a clear positive impact of having a public defender office. And we believe that based on estimation, cost estimation, TIDC would need at a minimum $23.5 million a year to establish and operate new regional PD offices to cover about 1/3 of rural counties without a PD office today. Now, this 1/3 comes from what we heard from responses from our survey, but also, takes into consideration the ability for TIDC to establish and operate new regional offices within a time frame. Now, that $23.5 million does not include funding and for TIDC staff, nor new staffing. That only includes amount of money to support PD, regional PD offices. So it does not include funding for TIDC staff. The third recommendation is we want to mention is when we talk to specifically judges, the first thing they said, the only thing I know what to do is to increase, fees, attorney fees, a court-appointed attorney fees. That's the only thing, we do. That's the only thing we can control. So I think, perform a comprehensive analysis of court-appointed attorneys' fees and motivation to take on indigent defense cases is important. On one end, economists will argue that, increase the pay, eventually you will find somebody, but not all attorneys, private attorneys, will actually take on indigent defense cases, even if they increase the pay. There are other motivations to do so, and a better understanding of that actually would go a long way. So performing an analysis to understand this allows to, for instance, identify the ability of the counties to, boost its tax revenue, maybe have a better understanding of the fees across the state, and allows counties to be in a better position to recruit indigent defense attorneys. Something that we also we want to recommend is TIDC should embark on an outreach campaign targeting rural counties to build trust and foster engagement. During our conversation and interactions with different stakeholders across the state, specifically rural counties, we felt that TIDC would benefit from building a relationship and maintaining those relationships with different rural counties. This relationship would allow cooperation, will build trust, and allows TIDC to better understand the needs of indigent defense across the state. And this allows, improvement in overall quality of indigent defense across the state. Whether that's, expanded visits, whether these are inviting rural counties. So that's something that TIDC will have to think about what the best way of embarking on that campaign. As we also discussed with stakeholders, with counties, with current PD offices, and as much as possible, we recommend ensuring that all current PD offices have sustainable funding. The main concern about the sustainable funding is a PD office in most instances could crowd out private attorneys from taking indigent defense cases. And in the case of PD office not having sustainable funding, there might be a complete void of attorneys taking on indigent defense cases. This opens the door here for TIDC to examine how it could increase the sustainability in funding to support counties who perhaps cannot afford regional PDs at all. And the last recommendation in my presentation, there's a couple of other recommendations in the report, and we'll have that report shared with you very soon. We recommend TIDC to establish regional offices to better serve the state's needs. As TIDC's role and mission is increasing, as the number of cases being deemed indigent is increasing, TIDC will be better in a better position to serve the state by having different regional offices, which is, if you look at other state agencies, they have different models, and that's something TIDC will have to look at what best works for its mission in terms of serving the state. That's all I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Did any board members have any questions, comments?
I have a question, or actually I have a couple. The first one, when I looked at the this the other day, the survey response, did this survey go out to justices of the peace as well? It did. So they're in the
Yes.
other. I think, and then the other question, when you were talking about the relationships with the counties and communities, are you counties? You're talking about the decision makers, the policy makers for those individual counties and working on those relationships.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
I just want to thank you. I think that was very helpful. I appreciate all the work y'all did on it.
I think it has some very good recommendations as well.
Obi. On the 23 million that you said it was going to cost a year, I assume that in the past we would do it the same way. We would do it in the future the way we've done it in the past, where we help start a group and then wean off over time. Is that your expectation in that? And starting a project in certain counties, I don't know that they'll be able to sustain it. What are your thoughts on that? What information do you have or need to help with that decision?
The estimate is based on the current process, you're right, for starting and then weaning the funding. When we asked the stakeholders, it wasn't very clear that the cost is not really the main issue. For them, the availability of attorneys is something that is very, when I mentioned the crisis, we've heard multiple times that some of those rural counties are facing with a situation that is not sustainable. And in the next 3 to 5 years, they may find themselves in a position where they do not have any attorneys to appoint. So in the public defender office could help with the availability of attorneys, and that we saw this in different counties, but also creating a program that will either guide some of the private attorneys not taking indigent defense cases into that, or recruit future indigent attorneys into public defense, I think is very important for sustainability for the system.
So I think, the problem is multifaceted as well, the solution. It seems that, in the past, folks attorneys would be more willing to serve this population, and now they're not. And we've thrown money at it just like others have in Williamson County, as others have, and that doesn't seem to be. And we still have the same small core group that continues to get inundated with these cases. The other thing is that there seems to be a lot more cases. A lot more people are getting free attorneys, if you will, and that's not sustainable. And I think all too often judges are hesitant to not assign counsel because they're afraid to get sued. But there's got to be some way of looking at that. I mean, not that some don't need it, I get it, but does everyone need an attorney? And I get it, family cases are complicated because you got multiple members and everybody gets a lawyer. It's just the direction we're going doesn't seem sustainable. That's my point. And so I don't know in what y'all have been looking at and kind of peeling it back, if you've got some suggestions for that.
What you mentioned is exactly what we found, and it applies to rural counties and mid-sized and urban, as you mentioned in Williamson County. With the attorneys we talked to, basically take indigent defense cases because they believe in public defense, and that's really very hard to put an amount of money. If somebody does not believe in is not interested, then no matter how much money you put in, they may not be interested. And I believe the labor market has changed dramatically after COVID-19, after the pandemic, where you have a lot of attorneys that just moved away to easier work, where they did not have to go to jail, they didn't have to basically work with defendants. Many of them took desk jobs and remote jobs that they found to be easier with same, if not more, compensation.
I did want to clarify something to the funding issues. To be clear, George, your funding suggestion is based on TIDC's sustainability model for rural regional public defender offices, where we fund 2/3 of the cost of the office on an ongoing basis, correct?
Correct.
All right. And it wasn't.
That's forever? Is that forever?
That is our policy right now. Yes.
So that 23 million represents what?
That 23 million. You speak, George. Sorry.
Yeah, it represents money to establish and operate regional PD offices for 1/3 of counties that do not have current PD offices under the current policy of TIDC.
So have you run that forward 5 years just to see, what it would be to TIDC, the budget for that?
So this would be per year.
Okay, so you're asking for 23 million per year, and that would start it up, but also sustain our portion of what we would give a county, or the total?
That would be for the 1/3, right? So if you want to increase the number of counties that will have regional PD offices, you will have to also increase that number.
And that does not include staff to organize it. Is that right?
It does not include funding for TIDC staff.
Right.
And I think it would also depend on the counties that are covered, because, we have such growth in some of these mid-sized counties, where our county, for instance, was 50,000 in the population, and we're probably at 75 already, just a couple years later. And that's going to require more attorneys in those regional offices to cover those counties that are growing faster. So I think that number is a start number, and it's definitely going to grow.
Judge, you're correct. This is a very conservative number because it does not include the population growth. So in the report, we have more information. So it's a start number. You're right.
I believe,
Scott?
George. Yes,
No, you
Judge,
go ahead. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, in terms of the methodology, George, I believe you told me that it's based on an average cost per case methodology, right, under a public defender office. And so it's really, I guess you looked at the cost of covering 1/3 of the cases in the rural counties that are kind of outstanding that don't have a public defender office, what that cost would be based on an average cost per case to cover one of those types of cases.
That's correct. So we looked at the TIDC's dispersed funding to cover PD offices, and then we calculated an average per case per office. And then we looked at the counties that do not have PD offices and calculated basically and estimated how much would it take to cover those costs. And it's including the 1/3, you're right.
One other piece of context that may be helpful on how you came up with the 1/3, George. Could you talk a little bit about how the responses you got from counties on public defender interest fell?
So in the online survey, we asked, in the presentation, I only showed you a couple of questions, but we asked a lot of questions about PD offices. And one of them was, would the county be open to having a PD office? And the responses that we found is 1/3 expressed interest. 1/3 of the counties are responses that do not have a PD office. Now, keep in mind that the stakeholders that responded may not be decision makers, and obviously, but 1/3 is a big number of where significant interest. Others are not close to it, so there is definitely growing interest, and we've heard from. In our interviews, we've heard from different stakeholders saying that in their mind, PD office seems to be the only way forward to support them with attorney availability.
Judge Keller? Okay. Commissioner Covey?
Yeah, a couple things. One, if we went forward with setting these up, are we going to have the attorneys to actually fill the spots? Because that's part of the problem after COVID too, is finding people that want to work. And two, have we considered like what we've done in mental health with telemedicine, actually having, I don't know if it's legal, but telelaw or whatever it's called. Is that something that, is it a thing now? And could it be a thing going forward to, especially for the most rural areas, because that's where we're having a hard time, but we're having a hard time in Williamston too. Is that something that would be available? I don't know. Just trying to throw out ideas.
We have an extensive group of recommendations to meet the staffing needs for attorneys later on in the presentation on one of our extraordinary items. The other part of your question dealing with virtual representation, we've done a lot of by necessity with Operation Lone Star. It's had some very mixed results, part of which being courts that are still meeting in person requiring extensive travel costs, which have created some significant challenges.
But, well, Judge Torres, I don't know if you want to speak to Operation Lone Star and how you felt virtual representation was going, but from what I saw, well, I know there was no way we could have pulled off what we pulled off in Operation Lone Star without virtual representation. It would have been impossible.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think it works well for general docket calls, arraignments, pre-trials and all that. But then at some point it has to be live. If you're going to try a case, I'm not comfortable trying a case via Zoom. And then on the felony courts, I think the district judges are handling that in the jurisdictions. I don't know if there's any other judges assisting them. So those are going to be more than likely live. But it works well and preliminarily, but once you get too far into it, I've had hearings, I've had different hearings as well, which are okay as long as you don't have to deal with a lot of exhibits and witnesses and such. So it has limited use, but it is useful.
Thank you, Judge Torres.
You're welcome.
All right, well, we have some follow-up recommendations and exceptional items related to the research here that we're going to get to here momentarily. If everyone's questions have been answered, excuse me, about the research. Okay, well, thank you very much, George. It's been great working with y'all on this project.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about the exceptional items. This was just kind of a high level to give y'all a sense of our funding requests versus appropriations over the years. We've gone, Jim can tell us more about FY 18-19. I believe that was his LAR request at $294 million. But we were appropriated $66 million that year. We got 94 the next 124 in FY 22-23, but that also included 29 million for Operation Lone Star. So not really an increase at all. And then last session, we did get a bit of a bump, but and that 154, that also includes, I believe, 41 million in Operation Lone Star funding. But we did get some GR to make up some of our shortfalls. But as we'll get to here shortly, it didn't quite make up for the shortfall because the estimates on what was going to come into the fair defense account were not accurate. Okay, next. So these are the proposed FY 26-27 LAR exceptional items that we would like you to consider. You can take them, leave them, change them, but this is what staff came up with for you. Some of these items do have options for you to choose from, particularly the funding to implement family protection representation. We have a few items, a few options for you there. The amount that we request for increasing public defense capacity, I think there's some wiggle room there too, because right now it only considers George's request or George's suggestion. I did add some additional funds, as you'll see, for some other items. But you know, that's up to y'all as well. And then we'll go through some suggestions on reducing attorney shortages and allowing for 6 additional TIDC FTEs for family representation and our recruiting efforts. And then we'll talk a bit about Operation Lone Star. Next. So exceptional item number 1 is to provide funding to implement the Family Protection Representation Program at TIDC. And Crystal is going to present on this exceptional item.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for giving your time to listen to this. This is an exciting time. This is the first time TIDC gets to consider this item. And this is a really big time for just trouble for law in our state. So thank you for listening to this. Okay, next slide. So during this portion of the presentation, we're going to cover a brief history of family protection representation spending. We've been collecting data for 3 years, so we have a fairly good idea of what's being spent in our state. We will have a short discussion on comparative spending, both out of the state and in our state. We've got 3 options to present to y'all for family rep funding. And then we'll talk about what we think we can do with the money if we're able to get it. Okay, so like I mentioned, we've been collecting data for 3 years now. So prior to fiscal year 2021, we did not have a good understanding of how much was being spent in our state to represent children and indigent parents who are involved in child protective services cases. So lawsuits that are being brought against a parent by the Department of Family and Protective Services. As you can see, in fiscal year 2021, that was the largest amount of money that we've collected so far. And this is just a direct report from the counties, just over 66 million. In fiscal year 22, that number did dip to over 61 million. And then this last year of data collection, it's around 61.7 million. It is creeping slowly back up. We don't know exactly why the numbers are a little bit different. You know, some of the DFPS removals have gone down. Laws have changed in some of these spaces, so that may have affected it, but I think we'll need a little bit more data to truly understand why spending may increase or decrease per year. But we're in the range of the 60 million range so far, it looks like, from the last 3 years. And when we look at the biennium, so the last biennium we have data collected for would be the 22-23 biennium. So that's going to come out to just over 123 million for the 2 years. And then we have a 3-year average of over 63 million. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we're thinking about how much are these counties spending to provide this representation that is required by Texas statute. Okay, next slide. So when we look at how much are other states spending, I will note that child welfare law or child protection law, it's called a little bit different depending on who you talk to. It is a fairly emerging field. So we don't have really awesome data throughout the US. You know, Texas, a state as large as ours, just started collecting data a few years ago. So it's not really super easy to find what states are spending. But we do have a good idea of what a few states have spent from fiscal year 21. So if we look at our numbers from fiscal year 21, that's the year where we spent just over 66 million. And that year that came out to $2.31 per capita. And we're just looking at sheer, you know, numbers of our population. When we compare that to Colorado, Colorado spent just over 60 million, and they have pretty high per capita spending. They're a much smaller state than us. They spent over $10 per capita for their parent and child representation. I will note they have a pretty robust system for providing parent and child rep. They have essentially a statewide managed assigned counsel system for both parents and kids in Colorado. Alabama spent just over 16 million, and that came out to per capita $3.14. And then when we look at New Mexico, also a fairly small state population-wise, they spent just under 10 million, but that came out to $4.73 per capita. So just some information to help you kind of understand where do we fall with what we're spending. We are, as you all know, we're a pretty large state. So I think it's helpful to see what other people are spending. So then when we look at in-state, the best, I think, comparison when we're thinking about spending would be Texas CASA. So for those of you that are not familiar, Texas CASA provides guardian ad litem services to children who are in child protective services cases. So when a child is involved in a lawsuit that's filed by DFPS, the Department of Family and Protective Services, that child is supposed to have both an attorney ad litem, so that's a licensed lawyer who, you know, does all the lawyer things, but then they're also supposed to have what's called a guardian ad litem. And a guardian ad litem represents the best interest of the child. A guardian ad litem does not have to be an attorney. Often they're not attorneys. And the Texas CASA model, Texas CASA is sort of an oversight organization, and then there's individual county CASAs. So there's like Travis County CASA, Bexar County CASA. You know, some of y'all may be familiar with the CASAs in your local communities. And then they use a volunteer model. So a lot of the people who are serving as a guardian ad litem for children are just community volunteers. They're not even really getting paid. CASA does have a pretty big staff. They have supervisors, they have directors, they have, this oversight organization, Texas CASA. But just to give you some comparative information, I will also note Texas CASA only operates in 219 counties in the state. So they're not covering the whole state. So their budget for FY23, this was their total budget, is just over 42.8 million. Texas CASA does get some state funding from the legislature. And last year, they got just over 16.1 million. And when you look at their budget, that comes out to about 37% of Texas CASA's total budget. And again, they're not providing any legal services. They're not able to file motions or, request jury trials or do anything like that. They're there to serve as the representative for the best interest of the child. And they can substitute judgment. They can kind of decide what they think is the best interest of a child. They're not providing any kind of legal representation. Okay, so when we look at funding for the legal representation side, so these are the lawyers who are representing the kids involved in these CPS cases, lawyers who are representing indigent parents who have been sued by the department for their parental rights. Essentially what we're looking at is this is a county funded system at this point. County funds are currently funding 100%. You all know we currently have 0 state funds coming in to support the work. There is some federal Title IV-E money that I'll talk about a little bit more. It is being underutilized. We're generally hovering around 20 counties in our state that are obtaining this Title IV-E money. Title IV-E money, it's not going to cover the whole bill, but it does provide some money, and we're just not we're not using that as much as we should. So to talk a little bit about Title IV-E, what this is a federal entitlement that is around to support legal representation for children and parents who are in CPS cases. I will note that very recently, this money has also been opened up to support representation for relatives, for Native American tribes. So the federal government continues to open up these resources to support families who are involved in these cases. What does this do? So this is not a competitive grant. This is essentially, this is an entitlement. If a county or an organization, anyone who's providing this service spends an allowable expense, they're entitled to 50% of that money back for legal representation. Now I say allowable expense because it's not exactly every dollar you spend, you get 50% back. There's a foster care rate that has to be applied. So it's a little less than exactly 50%, but what it is if money is spent for an allowable expense, you're supposed to get some money back. It also allows reimbursement for legal trainings at a higher rate of 75%. This money has been around since 2017, so quite a while now. Prior to that, the funds were being used to support legal representation for the DFPS. So counties that provided legal representation for DFPS via district or county attorneys, they could get reimbursement through 4E for long before 2017. But in 2017, the money was opened up to include both representation for DFPS and representation for families involved in the system. I will say that we've got some really promising things going on in this space. Although we have been underutilizing these funds for quite a while, TIDC has been working with DFPS to help them maximize the use of these funds. And we're currently negotiating an MOU on the topic. I'm really hopeful we're going to get there. We think we'll be able to assist the department, assist the counties, and kind of create a better system for everyone so we can start getting the money that people are entitled to anyway. We just need to figure out a better way to get it, but I think we're going to get there. Okay, so let's talk about the different options. We've got 3 options for y'all today. So option 1 would be the full ask. We know that last year the county spent just over $61.7 million. So the full ask would be that same amount of money per year, which does come out to over $123 million per biennium. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of money, but I do want to remind y'all we are a very large state. And then when we think about how much other states are spending, we may not be spending quite as much as perhaps we should for a state of our size. Okay, next one. So the second option would be a 50% match, just kind of go in the middle. This would come out to 30.85 million per year, which gets us to 61.7 for the biennium. And then the third option, and this is, I think sort of like the floor. What we could do is look at, okay, well, what does the state fund to provide services for CASA, right? The guardian ad litem services, those volunteers, they're providing the state is providing 37% of CASA's budget. So we could just say, well, then at the very least, lawyers for kids and parents should be funded at 37% of what CASA's been getting. So that would come out to 22.83 million per year, which is 45.6 per biennium. And then what would we do with this? So the TIDC model for adult criminal indigent defense and juvenile delinquency, has worked fairly well. So we think that a similar model would be smart to do support for family protection representation. So we would like to do some formula grants out to the county. So just help support everybody. We do want to make sure that money would be going to representing families. But we would like to do that. And then we also want to start a competitive improvement grant program, much like we've done for criminal defense. And we would like to include a component for pre-petition legal representation. So this is, pre-petition legal representation is a very, very hot topic in the child welfare space. So this would be providing representation for parents before a court case even starts. And the idea being that if you can get in early when parents are being investigated, perhaps you can avoid that child being put in foster care at all. Or perhaps you can avoid a court case, which in theory would reduce costs long-term and is in general better for families. So this is kind of been a movement nationwide. A lot of people in the child welfare space are speaking about pre-petition legal representation and are very supportive of it. A lot of the legislation in the last few years has been to reduce kids getting caught up in the foster care system in general. So if we were to do an improvement grant program, of course, we would want to support work in the court system because we need help there. But we'd also like to include people who maybe have ideas to do pre-petition work to relieve the stress that's going on in the court system. And then, of course, we would want some additional TIDC staff to help support all of this work that we'll talk about later when we talk about staff ads. That is all I have for now, if anyone has any questions.
Will you explain to me again how if the county spent this much money and we paid for it, we would get reimbursed from the federal government for up to 50%? How does that work?
Yeah, we need to, the logistics of this, we're still working on figuring out, how the money would flow. But yes, if the state funded, any dollar the state funds can be reimbursed for Title IV-E money, right? Assuming it's an allowable expense. But now, would that have to be the county spends it? And then I'm not sure where the arrows would go at this point. We're working with the department. But any money that is expended, once we have a good system in place, think of it as we'll actually be getting more than the state would fund. We would be able to maximize that to get more from the federal government.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? We solved all the world's problems today.
Judge Keller, when you and I were talking, I thought you had a good idea in terms of incentivizing counties to apply for Title IV-E funding.
Right. I thought we should make it a condition of the grant that they apply for Title IV-E funding.
What is the MOU that you're talking about? What is that designed to do? Is that to help the counties apply for the 4E funding?
So ideally, we would end up having TIDC staff provide the administrative support to the counties. So we would be doing the training to the counties, this is how you get your money, marketing to the counties. we've been discussing potentially putting this into our website, making it very streamlined and easy. But we would be doing the administrative work for DFPS. And then DFPS would still have to have oversight because they're ultimately responsible for the Title IV money. But we would be doing the legwork of making sure that the counties are getting in what they need to, making sure all the counties are engaging, and then letting DFPS know, this is what's happening. And then DFPS would have to, approve, but then it would go to the federal government. And then the money just goes straight back to the counties. It doesn't even flow through us. But that would be the idea, that we create a better system that's easier for everybody to understand and make it more efficient.
This Valerie Kobe, have you looked into what strings are attached to that federal money? Is that why more counties haven't already tried to get that money? And do we have a limit on how much we could get for the state in total? And how close are we to that limit, if so?
I do not believe there's a limit. Good question. And I do not believe there are really any strings. I think the real barrier right now is just the way the system works. Right now, DFPS is doing everything, right? So their contracts department is handling all of this 4E money. And the people that work in contracts, they're not attorneys. They're generally used to doing contracts for service providers, right? Therapists or social workers, different things, like more simple contracts. So I think that's part of the issue. And I just think there's been a disconnect in language. Some of the forms DFPS has are a bit confusing. There's just things that can be fixed to make it much simpler and more clear. So I don't know that it's necessarily a strings attached problem. I think it's more of a system problem.
So Child Protective Services is doing the application for 4E funds to go to the counties?
Correct.
It doesn't make sense. I would think it would be in the county's best interest to handle their own applications for Title IV money. And when I used to hear juvenile cases, our juvenile probation officer would seek Title IV funds for detention. And there were certain things that we had to comply with, certain types of placements in order to qualify for that 4E money. Is that the same pot? Is that what we're talking about?
That's correct. Yes. And that money, TJJD was the one doing the administrative support. So the way the federal money flows is it does have to sort of be, the child welfare agency in every state is responsible for making sure that the correct expenses are being reimbursed, right? But they don't have to do the administration. So in that example that you gave, Judge Torres, TJJD was doing the administration, and then DFPS was just saying, yes, that looks good. No, it doesn't. So it would be a similar idea for us. We would be doing the administrative work working with the counties, as opposed to DFPS doing the administrative work. But they still have to be involved. We can't completely cut them out of the process.
Well, if we're underutilizing those funds, and I think that they need some assistance in training, like what you were mentioning, that they're not attorneys and such. And, to me, it's kind of like they're not really that vested in it because the money's not coming to them. It's going to the counties to reimburse for the attorneys, for the legal expenses.
Right.
It's a problem.
It is, but we're hoping to fix it.
Be nice.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, because I know that there's a lot of times when we get HUD money or whatever, and there are always strings, and it's not so much that you can't use it the way you want to use it, but it's the reporting, and it's a lot of times it's difficult, and if you get it wrong, ultimately you could have to pay back the money. So you got to make sure that you do it right. That may be why the smaller counties, or they're not staffed to run grants and stuff like that. It's just more complicated, I'm just saying. And so is that something that TIDC is looking at helping with, that if the counties apply directly? I wasn't clear on that, on what our involvement would be here.
We would be taking over all of those roles of the county, or maybe it's not necessarily even applying, the county saying, this is how much money we spent, and then we review and say, this is how much money they should be getting back, right? We have seen the forms that DFPS is currently using. They've been really great with, being open with us about how the system is working. And some of the forms just aren't, they're just a little confusing with the verbiage on the form. It's actually it's not as complicated as I thought it was now that we've kind of looked under the hood for how it's working. But essentially we would be taking over, working directly with the counties, making sure they're submitting their financial information, what they've spent. We already do the IDER, the Indigent Defense Expenditure Report. They're already having to report to us what they spend. So this would be a way to maybe take that information they're sending to us and then, figuring out how to get that to DFPS to show them like, these are reimbursable expenses and this is how much money they should be getting back.
And Child Protective Services has always been very stretched with their personnel. They have a lot to do. That would help them tremendously, I'm sure.
Agreed. They're constantly underwater, and it's a very stressful job. So if we could just take that, just the work of it from them, and they seem very open to the idea, and we're just kind of working out the nuts and bolts of how it will work. But we think we will get there. But we'll talk about this later, but we'll need some staff to help with that if we're able to do it.
I think this is a huge benefit if TIDC got involved in this area. I know how much money these counties spend, and it's hard, but yet you have to have good quality representation. And then if you can find a source other than the county's coffers, it would be very helpful.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, if that's all the questions, I guess the question to you now is which of the three options would you like to choose, or some other option? So there was the full funding option, there was the ask for half option, or ask for 37%, just like CASA gets.
So this may be a silly question, but have you looked at each one of these options to see what we could accomplish with each and compare that to the need that you found?
Well, I think right now, we have no state support for this work. So frankly, any support coming in would be immense. I think obviously the more we spend, the more we can do. Ideally, we would, again, do some formula grants. We would really love to start building some systems. We've had statutes on the books for many years that you can build offices of child representation, parent representation, max for this work. And still we only have one office of child rep and one office of parent rep in Travis County. And I think part of that is we just haven't had support for that. We haven't had anyone like TIDC to be around to help people build things. So ideally we would be able to, build offices, or if a PD's office was interested in building a division, there's a lot of really cool stuff we could do with improvement grants. Of course, it will depend on how much money we get, but anything we get, because this system is so resource strapped and in such desperate need, I think anything would be very beneficial, no matter how much y'all agree to spend or request.
So I know that there's shortfalls for us, for TIDC. Is that going to be a statewide deal? I mean, what is the temperature of the legislature as far as if we ask for all of it? Are they going to laugh in our face and punish us, or do you think they would be open to it? Anybody know? Do we have any state reps here today, or no?
They'll be there hopefully on Friday.
Yeah, I'd like to know what their sense is, because I don't want to ask for too much, but yet I don't want to under ask as well.
Well, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. And one is, I don't have any reason to think that this is a statewide, there's going to be a statewide shortfall, because this is primarily from the lack of jury funds that we have gotten in the past. So that's been wiped out. And that's where most of the if not all the shortfall comes from. So hopefully the state will have money. The other thing is I don't think that we should ask for all of it because it disincentivizes the counties from watching what they spend. So I think it's a bad idea to ask for all of it. Whether we do 37% or 50%, don't really have an opinion. But based on, and maybe what we ought to do is look at a couple of facts. One is, I think this is something the legislature would want to do if they could. So I think it's something that we're not going to have to persuade them of the benefit of it, just persuade them of the cost of it. And the other thing is, well, I already forgot, but oh, what else are we going to ask for? So I want to ask for money for family representation. I'm not sure what other things we ought to ask for. It seems like we ought to ask for help with rural counties in one way or another. And we probably ought to ask for the legislature to make up the shortfall. So maybe what we ask for is less a matter of principle and more a matter of what we think we might get as a whole.
And to your point, Judge Keller, if we could wait until we go through all the items and then come back, I think you're correct in not asking for all of it. Maybe 37% is something we could base it on and say, well, it's the same as what you're, funding CASA. But if we could look at the total ask before we agree to any of it, then we could see the total impact. I think that would help me in the decision making, but I'll yield to whatever the group wants to do.
We can do that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think what we need to do is kind of get our wish list ready and see where we are at the very end of it. I agree. I don't think we should ask for everything, but maybe we should ask, depending on where our wish list is, ask for the 50, because if they cut it down to the 37, then, it's kind of like, right, your Christmas, wish list, right? You ask for everything and hopefully you get some things.
One more thing I want us to remember, and I think we should wait until the end too, but we don't want to, what we're going to be doing is having family rep funds competing with indigent criminal defense funds. And I don't want to wipe out our ability to get one in trying to get the other.
Good point. Jim, did you have a point?
Yes. Yeah, good discussion all the way around. And Judge Cower, Judge Maderi, Commissioner Kelvey, I concur. We need to kind of wait and then, decide how we want to prioritize. Crystal, I did have a question on like maybe the second slide you had as far as how the other states fund. I'm curious, like with the state of Colorado, they had a certain percent. They funded it, whatever. Alabama, New Mexico, were those county funded or were they fully state funded?
So Colorado has an interesting system where they're like a statewide MAC where they're still county based, but they have an oversight system that's at the state level. So each county has their own list, that sort of thing. But the oversight system pays the lawyers, the oversight system provides the experts, the social workers, things like that. New Mexico is actually in a time of transition right now, so it's different from when we had those numbers in 2021. They are moving to a statewide system, and that's been a recent development over the last few years. And I believe Alabama is not a fully statewide system. But no one's like a statewide public defender. We didn't put those in because we know it's probably never going to be a system that we end up using here in our state.
And kind of where I was going with that is, I do think Colorado, the state, funds this at 100%, so it's not a county burden. So I think in our write-up, we would want to make that clear that, whatever states like fully fund this, because on public defense, And I can forward and Scott, you'd referenced the 1819 LAR, which was the last one I was involved with while at TIDC. We did request full state funding, but staggered over a 6-year period. And the principal driver behind that was Andy Murr. And he said, to really get the attention of the legislature, you're not going to necessarily get it, but at least raise the awareness, because end of the day, the state has pushed these burdens down to the county. I concur, though, like we'll ask for 50% and then potentially get to 37%. And what Judge Keller raised too is we don't want to see the indigent defense piece that's underfunded and constitutionally required, that hey, we want to go and provide this parental and child representation, so that hurts the overall funding for indigent defense. So excellent presentation. I think super great discussion. And I'll go in forward to the group and kind of take a look at what we did, I guess 8 years ago. And it was the last request of full state funding. I did encourage Jeff, since I was involved with Lubbock at the time, to do full state funding. He said, no, Jim, I'm not going to. I know he brought it to the board and stuff, but there wasn't kind of the will. So end of the day, it's a state responsibility. County's a political subdivision of the state, so the state can delegate its responsibilities. And I'm delighted that we're talking about sustainable funding for the rural. I thought George's presentation was excellent. The number where he referenced that there's like a decline of whatever 14 or 15% post-COVID. I know in Bear County, we're down over 50%. We had over 500 attorneys pre-COVID. We're down to 250. So in a major urban, the least affluent of all the major urbans, but I know we're down over half of what we had pre-COVID. So I'm excited for the work that y'all were doing, and let me go ahead and send this one off.
All right, thanks, Jim. It's 11:20. I want to make sure we get through all of these. So let's move on to exceptional item 2. Per y'all's suggestion, we will save your options on exceptional item 1 until the end, and y'all can make a decision as a package. So exceptional item 2 is appropriate $12 million in general revenue to address the funding shortfall in the fair defense account. Edwin is going to talk about this one briefly.
Hello, everyone. Edwin Colfax, TIDC Grants Director. I get to focus on the sort of bad news that's emerged lately about our revenue shortfall, but we do want to ask the legislature to help us make it right. And I think this is probably one of the quickest and simplest of the items we're presenting today, because it's pretty straightforward what the problem is. So TIDC, as most of you know, is funded by the legislature through a mix of regular general revenue appropriations and appropriations from the Fair Defense Account, which is called a General Revenue Dedicated Fund. The Fair Defense Account receives its revenue from fees collected, mostly from a portion of the consolidated court costs, also a portion of attorney dues that are paid to the state bar. There's a fee collected on surety bonds, a portion of which goes into the Fair Defense Account. And historically, some jury service fund amounts. The way that was calculated was at the end of the fiscal year, if the jury service fund had resources in excess of $10 million, the excess came to TIDC. Historically, that was about $6 million a year, not in recent years. So the legislature appropriated Fair Defense Account funds in the General Appropriations Act to TIDC, along with our general revenue. And the Fair Defense Account, they are doing so based on the comptroller's projections about revenue into the Fair Defense Account. They appropriate a number. However, in order for us to spend the money has to come in through the collections. And that's where the gap is. There is a significant gap that has emerged between the amount that the legislature has appropriated from the Fair Defense account in the General Appropriations Act and the official state budget, and the amount of cash that's actually coming into the account that's available for us to use for our program. And so year to date, we just recently got some updated projections from the Office of Court Administration, and it's looking like we're going to fall between $11 and $12 million short of the amount that the legislature told us we had to work with in the appropriations. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a table that kind of shows what's going on here. I also want to mention that in addition to TIDC receiving appropriations from the Fair Defense account, another state agency, our friends at the Office of Capital and Forensic Writs, which is the state public defender handling death penalty post-conviction writs, as well as some forensic writs of habeas corpus related to questionable forensic science convictions. That state program is also funded from the office or from the Fair Defense account. So if you look here at this table on the screen, it just summarizes the legislative appropriations in the General Appropriations Act, specifically of Fair Defense account funds. We were appropriated $37.8 million in 24, $37.37 million in FY25. You see the appropriations that were also made out of this fund to OCFW. The total up there, that's about 41 million for 24, 40.5 million for 25 were totally appropriated out of the Fair Defense account. And then also OCFW's employee benefits come out of this fund because that's their total appropriation comes out of this fund. That's another $600,000 annually. So then the second to the last or third to the last row there, we have projected actual revenue to the Fair Defense account, which is coming in at only about 35.8 million, and we're projecting it flat. But this is based on our analysis and OCA's analysis of actual collections. So there's a pretty significant gap there in terms of the amount of the fund that's actually come in that is available to TIDC. And you see the estimated revenue shortfall there in red at the bottom. As Judge Keller mentioned, it appears that the biggest driver of this gap between the amount that they're telling us is appropriated to us and the amount of money that's actually coming in appears to be related to the jury service fee revenue that TIDC has gotten since its, well, not since its inception, I think, but for many, many years. That have been coming in reliably at around $6 million per year and has really dramatically dried up with really no good explanation. We did see some dips in revenue clearly associated with COVID-19 in the consolidated court cost collections. Those have rebounded dramatically as court operations have returned to normal and other aspects of the system like traffic tickets have returned more to normal. However, the jury service fee revenue has totally dried up. And in fact, the legislature did make some changes in the last session that increased pay to people who serve on juries, which is clearly going to impact that fund moving forward. But it really doesn't explain why this particular piece of our revenue has dried up previous to the inaction of the increased juror pay. So that's really the funding gap that we're dealing with. We're adjusting our budget to make it work. We had been working with a number of counties to make big investments in new programs that are direly needed, and we're just hitting the pause button reluctantly but necessarily on implementing any new programs, adding any new FTEs until we get a better handle on where we are revenue-wise. I'm thinking, yeah, go to the next slide. So this slide just shows you what's been going on with Fair Defense account inflows in recent years. There is a decline that's been somewhat gradual in consolidated court cost collections. You can see that COVID-19 clearly had an impact here, but there's a long-standing trend of declining revenue into the Fair Defense account that's even independent of what's been going on with our jury service fund revenue. So all that said, one of the exceptional items that we definitely want to put into our request is that the legislature acknowledged the gap between what they told us we had to work with and what's actually come in to support that appropriation and to fill the gap. And that's the proposed exceptional item number 2. Scott, are any questions or on what I've covered so far there?
No questions for me.
Great.
I have a question. What if they don't give us the total amount, the 11 or 12 million that we would ask for the biennial? What is it? I mean, what's the outcome of that? I mean, what's the impact?
So we've worked up a revised budget that we'll be proposing showing to the commission at the meeting on Friday. We'll also be discussing it in the grants reporting committee later this afternoon. It's the staff proposed budget to make adjustments given this curveball of revenue shortfalls. In terms of the continuing grants, the kind of existing grant obligations that TIDC has already taken on, we are able to continue to provide the funding that we have basically already committed to. The change, if we don't get this gap filled, is that we won't be able for at least a few years to entertain any significant new grant programs, new grant awards for new programs. So in terms of our ability to keep up with our existing obligations, we're able to do that. But if we don't get this addressed, then we won't, that curtails our ability to do new things with counties that have been coming to us. And I'll tell you that when we were breaking the news to some of the grant applicants in this cycle that this has emerged, a shortfall has emerged, many of them, I know that, for example, Waller County, Valverde County, they were working closely with us and other members of the staff to put forward applications for new programs because they don't have the attorneys to keep the cases moving. And we're just forced at this juncture to say, we want to work with you, we want to help you. We have to hit the pause button on new investments at this time.
Yeah.
Our formula grants have gone down too, and that I think would probably be a permanent situation, right, Edwin? If they don't restore some of this funding. I mean, we used to give like over $21 million a year in formula grants, and we're down in the $17 million range now.
Right, we have in this current year reduced formula funding to about 17,500. I'm sorry, 17.5 million for 2024 formula grants. We're proposing a slight 17 million for 2025 at this juncture. We'll have better visibility on how much we have to work with after we close out the year. And I would anticipate we'll be able to stay flat from the reduced level that we are in now at 17.5 million. But that would be, thank you, Scott, another consequence of the legislature not addressing this is that our formula funding would be, at that reduced level moving forward.
Well, and I'd like to just comment on this too. I think this is one of the important things that we have to ask for in this exceptional items because, TIDC is kind of, it's almost like a rotating basis, right? It keeps going on, right? You got to keep the train on the tracks. And so, with the shortfall, when we start up new programs, right? And then we can continue on with these programs that we've got, but then, we're going to get to the end of the track and we don't have a new train that's ongoing. And so I think this is one of the most important things that we have to do. Because there are a lot of programs out there that need TIDC and need the help of this organization. And so I'm sold on this one for sure.
Yeah, I think really we need budget predictability in order to operate. There's such a lag time with grant programs and partnering with the counties to get things moving forward that we really need to work with the legislature to know where we stand at the beginning of the fiscal year, and this has really been a challenge this cycle in particular.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, my note on this slide says this needs to be the first.
Yeah, I second that.
I agree.
All right, well, if you have any follow-up questions on this item that I've been presenting, feel free to reach out and I guess if there's no other discussion on this particular one, I guess we can get moving.
All right, exceptional item 3. So this is the item about increasing public defense capacity through new and expanded public defender offices. This is based on, in part, on PPRI's research for us. Next. So at this point, we were thinking we would just, there's the $23.5 million that George had come up with. In terms of how, just to give y'all some insights into how these things usually work, you don't start up an office, it's not like TIDC gives a county a grant to start up an office, and then October 1, there's a chief, there's an office, there's a full number of staff on board, everything is in play, all the equipment is purchased. Like, it's not like there's, a magical public defender genie that the PD office just kind of pops out of on day 1. And so what that means is there's a transition phase in terms of what it takes in order to establish that office. And so I was going to suggest, like, I think we could basically fund, like, half of the offices that are suggested here and half of that cost in year 1. And then for those offices in year 2, they would be fully funded. And then the other half would be started up in year 2. It's still the same amount of money. It's just over a 2-year period rather than a single year period. So it would be, that being said, in future legislative sessions, I mean, the legislature does need to be aware that these are, this is an ongoing commitment, legislature. This is not really a one-time ask. We're asking you to give us these funds for this next biennium, and then in future legislatures, we're going to need $23.5 million a year to operate all of these offices. These funds do not include funds for mid-sized or urban counties. It doesn't include funds to help more needy counties who can't afford to pay 1/3 of the cost of an office. So this is an issue that came up in George's larger report that he did not include in the slides here. He had more recommendations, more findings, but one of his findings was, and we've seen this firsthand, there are some counties who can't even afford an office when we're paying for 2/3 of the cost. And so if we wanted to entertain the possibility of paying more for certain offices, then, these funds would not include that. So, throwing all that stuff together, I came up with $35 million for the biennium, but like I said, that's there's a little bit of science between behind the 23.5. The other is guesstimation work, but I don't anticipate we will have difficulty spending the money.
So, Scott, thank you. My concern is sustainability. And we just talked about the fact that we're not going to be receiving enough money from the means that we thought. We're going to ask for, the delta of $11 or $12 million. What encourages us to start really big here and do this many counties at one time? I mean, my concern obviously is that in a couple of years, we won't have the funds to continue that. And now we're not just adding contract people, but we're having employees for these counties. I believe is the route we're going here, setting up this system. So, I mean, is there a way to start off smaller? I mean, I know that there's the biggest need is perhaps the smallest counties out in maybe West Texas or something that just can't find attorneys, but put it on a scale and maybe work up to something. I don't know. My concern is sustainability.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, you go ahead, Judge Keller.
Well, I agree that that's a problem. I mean, we can, even if we don't get the money to fill the shortfall, we're able to go ahead and fund what we're funding now. But I don't want us to get into a position where in order to keep the PDs going, we have to shortchange the counties that don't have PDs. So, and as a practical matter, since we're talking about not having enough money, I would put this, I mean, I think it's real important. I think the legislature would appreciate us doing something like this. But as far as the money, I would put that lower on our exceptional item list. And one of the upcoming recommendations is kind of outreach and creating ways to get people to work, get more lawyers to work in rural counties. And it almost seems like we ought to try fixing the problem on that end and really put some money into that, which we haven't talked about yet, instead of over obligating ourselves. So I think this is an important thing to do. I'm not sure where I would put it on the exceptional item list, though, or how much it should be.
I think I'd like to see some information too on this about the counties covering that 1/3 of cost and where that equates to what they're spending now on contract attorneys instead of a PDO, and what that looks like for those counties. And I think we could probably get a lot of county buy-in to help with this as well, if we can show that those counties aren't going to be spending any more money than they already are.
Judge Woolley, that's part of what we do in our planning studies for counties, is a detailed analysis of what their current spend is and what we anticipate it would be under both the initial 80% on the sustainability for the rural counties and then the ongoing 66%. Typically, they save in year one. Year two has some savings and maybe a break even. And even with that, just due to the lack of attorneys, they're incredibly interested. But we can certainly get you a couple of our recent planning studies so you can see the analysis of what it looks like.
It really does depend on the county, Judge Woolley. There are some, maybe not surprisingly, like if a county doesn't pay a whole lot of money for their court-appointed lawyers and you come in with a public defender office and they're, paying extremely low, there's no way for a public defender office to compete with that low level of funding, even with the 2/3 subsidy that we are providing. There are other counties that pay a higher rate to their court-appointed lawyers, and they end up saving significant amounts of funds because they pay more under the current system, and due to the subsidies, they actually end up paying less. And then there's other counties where it's really just a wash. They end up paying about the same, and all of the benefits of the public defender they appreciate. And there are counties they know they're going to pay more, and they're happy with that if we're going to solve the problem of making attorneys available on a regular basis.
Well, thank you for the information. Sorry for the newbie question.
No worries.
Yeah, Scott, if I might comment about some of the issues you just brought up.
Please do, Judge.
In my county, my wheel has two spokes. We don't have attorneys. It didn't save a lot of money, but we have people, and the PDO shows up, and they do represent. And that's the most important thing. I have court-appointed attorneys in the past come to court, and they say, who is my client? They've never even talked to them. So this is the best money we've spent in my county. And of course, I border Bear County. I guess Bethke keeps all their attorneys down there, doesn't let them come up here, but we'll see about that. But it's very important. The further west you go, the fewer attorneys you have. So it's not a matter of who you pay, who you don't pay. It's a matter of having somebody to pay. And that's the biggest issue. And back to CPS cases, there's a comment about the counties watching what they spend. We don't have any control on that. That's up to the judge. And I have got to be careful here. I'm not as PC as I might should be, but we have CPS judges who would like to pay a lot more, and they don't have to produce county budget, so they're pretty benevolent with appointments. The we have Senator Betancourt wants to cap us at 3.5% at the county level for increasing taxes. Senator Middleton doesn't want us to testify to say what it does to us. So we have a real issue in county government about funding things. And I think, and I may be out of place here, but it looks like that the state needs to know what it costs to operate the programs. If we ask for less than it costs, unless we have a caveat there that says, okay, we're going to still eat half of it locally. I mean, I've never asked for something and they said, oh, you didn't ask for enough. We're going to give you more. I've asked for more. They say we're going to give you less. So that, my opinion is we need to tell the state what it takes to operate their system. They passed it. They mandated it. And they should help fund it. So anyway, just a gripey old man with get off my soapbox. But I think we need to tell the state this is what you've done to us as a commission or as a county, and this is what it's going to cost to fix it. If you're not willing to pay that, that's fine, but you need to admit the fact that what you've implemented for us to do is funded by 12, 13% by the state. So they've abdicated their responsibility, in my opinion. And it's unfortunate we don't have any members that are in the legislature on this call so they can hear that. But anyway, so I'll be quiet. I'll be on perpetual mute from now on.
Oh, please don't, Judge Evans. Yeah, on that note, I mean, I would concur with the sentiment that my general philosophy, and I learned this from a state senator I once worked for, Senator Rodney Ellis. You ask for what you want and you take what you can get. And I also understand that you also have to be cognizant of different asks crowding each other out. So there is a balancing act here. There's not unlimited amounts of funds, but another complicating factor is building capacity and creating a system that more lawyers are going to want to practice in rural Texas is going to require these funds to create more rural regional public defender offices. It is the draw that that will not exist with private assigned counsel going out to rural Texas, driving far distances. We've seen what's happened. Judge Evans has told you what happens. It's a system that just does not work for rural Texas. So I'm not telling y'all what to ask for, but it is something it's part of the puzzle and in terms of building capacity and creating incentives for more people to get into the work. All right, I want to make sure that we don't run out of time. We're on the verge of running out of time. And I do want to get to that item that Judge Keller referenced because it is very important. Kristen Meeks is going to take on, present to you our next exceptional item, which is how we're proposing another way TIDC is proposing to reduce attorney shortages, and this way through internships, fellowships, and student loan repayment. Kristen?
Thanks, Scott. So first things first, we're going to go through kind of just a very high-level overview of how public defense offices look in the state, what they cover, and for that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Improvement, Bill Cox. Bill?
Good morning. So if we could go to the next slide, just to put context on what we've been talking about. We have public defense offices, either public defenders or MACs. Some are single county, some are multi-county public defender's office, serving over 80 counties in the state. Of those, I want to draw your attention to the turquoise up in the Panhandle, the High Plains, and to the purple down on the coastal plains, our Crossroads office, which are two newest. They have just hired their chiefs and are going to be going online, hiring their staff. As Scott alluded to earlier, that's not a fast process. In addition to needing staff for them, when we did our salary study at the board's request earlier this year, at least 64 attorney positions were open in the existing offices across the state. And then we also have 3 statewide offices: the Regional Public Defender's Office for Capital Cases, the Office of Capital and Forensic Writs, and the State Council for Offenders. None of these cover the third of the rural counties across the state that PPRI identified would like to have a public defender's office and either didn't realize there was available grant funding or just hadn't started the process to get there. All of this is complicated by the fact that, as was pointed out earlier, we have 27% less attorneys taking appointments over the 8 years from 2014 to 2022. And that is continuing to grow. As Jim Bethke pointed out, as we've heard when we do our policy monitorings, the attorneys are saying, we've been doing this for a long time, we're ready to retire, no one's coming in to take this work. And so we've looked and worked to come up with strategies to attract attorneys to rural areas, to attract them to regional practice, to frankly attract them into doing public defense work. Because even in the large urbans, as you saw from the caseloads are increasing because there are less and less attorneys. You heard about Bexar County. We've seen caseloads go from 15% over guidelines in 2014 to 27% over guidelines in 2022. With that, Kristen has several options we've come up with to help encourage attorneys' interest in public defense and also to bring them to rural areas and to hopefully keep them there long enough to make a significant impact and maybe have some decide that's where they want to spend their careers practicing. Kristen?
Thanks, Bill. So first, I just kind of wanted to introduce you to some key core target audiences for recruitment to get people into the work. This is based off of both conversations we've had as well as some data from attorney vacancies and things like that. So this is kind of really core need areas we have here in the state. Obviously, targeting law schools and new attorneys is a great place to start because that's how you kind of start building that pipeline of getting folks into the work straight out of law school early in their careers. So hopefully they can continue to either be in the work or incorporate public defense work throughout their legal journeys, looking at both in-state and out-of-state for kind of that recruitment side of things. Here in Texas, we are blessed. We actually have 10 law schools across the state. However, we also know that quite a few attorneys that end up practicing in Texas, calling Texas home, do not go to a Texas law school. We have folks that are born and raised Texans who want to come back home that go to law school out of state. And we also have folks that are out of state that want to come to Texas for various reasons to continue their careers. And so that's kind of one thing to look at there is that initial kind of early career pipeline piece. The next target audience we have is looking for more experienced attorneys. This is something we've heard both from our offices and just across the state, having those more experienced attorneys there, not just to take those higher level felony cases, capital cases, those types of things, but also having them there to be able to mentor and train up this next generation of attorneys to continue to grow that pipeline. That's been something we've heard both on the public defense side as well as wanting to get in private attorneys to take appointed cases with robust experience. The third kind of area is kind of a little bit more of a catch-all target audience. We're talking about specialty areas, areas that it's above and beyond criminal defense practice as a whole, cases that require more specialized knowledge or training. We've also heard that there's been struggles to recruit in those spaces. One that we hear about often is Spanish or other language fluencies, having attorneys being able to speak some other languages and communicate with their clients in that way. Mental health cases as well, appellate and capital, all have different kind of expertise, as well as sometimes eligibility requirements for being able to even take on those cases. And we have a lack of attorneys in those areas as well. So what have we been doing so far? This is just like a little bit of a high level of kind of what TIDC is working on at the moment, technical assistance. We are kind of in these three main categories. So Texas law schools, we just announced that we're doing public defense days for the fall of 2024. For those who are unaware, we organize events at Texas law schools throughout the state. Last year, we went to 7 out of the 10 law schools and worked with other law schools to get public defense practitioners on panels, but PD days are kind of organized events. Their intent is to bring both public defenders and private counsel who do this work into law schools and have them talk with students kind of in a dedicated, organized panel fashion with discussion afterward. We also do maintain a recruitment calendar and a manual for our public defense leaders to keep them up to date on the latest opportunities to recruit at Texas law schools, as well as kind of give them the background and the knowledge base around how to strategically recruit and kind of what different recruitment targets are looking for. We also maintain our internships and fellowships page on our website as kind of a one-stop shop for if you are new in public defense, if you're looking for an internship, if you're a law student, or a fellowship if you're just coming out of law school, where you can potentially find those types of programs. The second thing we're starting to work more on and expanding is looking at experienced recruiting. Going to be connecting more and more with affiliate groups, bar associations, and creating meetups to really spread the word around public defense and how you can incorporate that work if you're in private practice, as well as if you're looking for a career change and really wanting to come into the public defender side of the things, kind of connecting with those folks and encouraging that recruitment. We just came back from the Rusty Duncan Criminal Defense Lawyers Conference, and we actually tabled that entire time and got to meet some great folks out there and got to tell them about opportunities in public defense. And then the third thing that we're looking to kind of really expand into at this point is non-Texas recruiting. So connecting with non-Texas law schools, as well as national associations and groups, and really kind of tie them into all the different public defense opportunities here in Texas, whether that's as a public defender or as a private counsel taking those types of cases. Really high level rundown of kind of what we're currently doing. And that's going to lead us into kind of our top 3 asks for the LAR. First things first, and we're doing this kind of in the how you move through your career order, for lack of better terms. We're really going to focus on rural recruitment because that's where we've seen this dire need, especially not just through conversations, but also through the rural needs assessment from PPRI. So first things first is having grants to institutions to fund internships, specifically funding internships at rural public defense offices. The estimate here is that if you do 480,000, excuse me, per year, that would support 96 law student interns. That would work out to about 2 law students in each office. And you would be at 960,000 in the biennium. And the intent here is to be able to provide funding for those students over a summer internship. So a full summer, they're out there, they're working. This is in part because there's not a lot of funding available for specifically criminal legal work when it comes to public service. There's a lot more public service opportunities, scholarships, stipends, and things like that in the non-criminal space, but there's a really lack of funding in most places to be able to have students have paid internships. It also is especially hard if you're trying to get folks to go into a rural regional office. in case you were wondering, all of our law schools here in Texas are all in urban areas. They're in metros. And so that when students do rural regional internships at our rural offices, they are required to move out from wherever they're living currently when they're in law school. They have to find a new place to live. They have living expenses out there. They have the travel cost, all those kinds of things, in addition to doing the work and kind of seeing what it's like to live in that community, which is one of the big benefits of having both students as interns as well as early in your career having those experiences in rural areas, understanding, seeing what the practice is like, getting a feel for the community. Starting to build relationships in those communities is really big to be able to encourage folks to come back to choose to start their career here. So that's one of the things that we're looking at from an exceptional item basis would be funding rural internships. The next one that we are looking to do here is moving down a little bit farther in that process. We're looking to provide some funding for fellowships, so rural fellowships. The difference between an internship and a fellowship program is an internship tends to be for law students who are in law school who are coming out to work for the summer. A fellowship program is really focused on that time frame, kind of that first year after you graduate law school. It's based on, you graduate law school and then you have some period of time where you're studying for the bar, you may be working while you're studying for the bar, and then bar results come out, and then you're a licensed attorney. And so that kind of year after law school is kind of a weird area for folks if you're a law student. It can be really hard to kind of sort out, are you getting paid for the work? Are you not getting paid for the work? Everyone kind of runs that time frame a little differently. So the intent behind this would be to support 15 one-year fellowships at offices that says, hey, you are going to get paid, you have a paid job, you are working a job, and then give you that year for bar licensure to come through and then for you to be hired on as an attorney in that space. That's kind of the idea behind a fellowship program, fellowships that kind of stability that you have by having a paid job and knowing you're going into a paid role after you graduate law school is huge, especially for students. It also kind of helps with the sometimes incongruency between when county hiring cycles are and when law students graduate, because those opportunities often come up at kind of opposite times of the year just because of funding years. So that's kind of another item we've got here for the biennium. That'd be 2.7 million. And then our third item, again, kind of moving through that pipeline, and this is kind of another incentive to get people into this rural space, would be student loan repayment or a scholarship program. So the intent behind this program, there's a few different examples of these types of programs already here in the state of Texas. We have the Physicians Education Loan Repayment Program, for example. And that program, and that's kind of what this one is based off of, the intent is to get physicians to serve in health professional shortage areas, so rural areas that are really need doctors to serve in those areas. You essentially have physicians going out, they commit to serve in one of these areas to do the work. And then every year after a year of service, they get a part of their student loans repaid. And it's a kind of progressive model. So you get a smaller percentage in after your first year, more second year, third year, and fourth year. So it guarantees you a 4-year commitment with those physician's loans. There's a kind of the other side of this you could look at is a scholarship program. So instead of doing a kind of 4-year forgiveness model on the back end after you've gone to law school, you could do a scholarship model. The Texas Armed Services program is a scholarship-based model, and they help pay for a certain amount of your education. And so essentially you get the education, you get the scholarship, and then you commit to doing a 4 years of service after you graduate. And the way that one works is you make that commitment, that amount is paid. If you don't fulfill your commitment, then it turns into a loan and then you repay it back. So just kind of looking at two sides of a similar issue here. So the idea would be to incentivize these kind of 4-year commitments. We also know from both other states that have programs like this, or also just from some research from these programs in state, we know that these programs really encourage folks right after law school. Student debt is always at top of mind after law school, especially with the increasing amount of student debt that law students are coming out with. It really encourages new lawyers to come into these spaces to work. And if you work somewhere for 4 years, you really start making ties into the community. You find that this is your home. You have friends in the community, and it really encourages them to stay in these areas, even outside of that 4-year commitment. And that's kind of what the research has shown in this area. So that's kind of this idea here. Our estimate kind of math on this would be, it'd be 5 million for a biennium. As a note, this ask is a little bit different, a little odd. The organization here in Texas that actually implements and does all of these educational based scholarships, loan repayments, etc., is the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And so this would be kind of a program that they would potentially be implementing. I know we've started asking about kind of what that possibility might look like, but this is kind of that third option that gets all the way to student loan, either repayment or a scholarship program, to get those 4-year commitments to really get people to do the work and stay in places and provide that meaningful representation in areas that really just don't have enough attorneys right now. And with that, that is all I have on this one. If you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, Kristen.
What is the amount of how the payback? Either the scholarship, how much is that? I mean, are we making a dent in it, or would it not be any type of dent? And then, so what's that number?
So, for example, on the loan repayment side, for example, the Physicians Education Loan Repayment Program, this past legislative session, they had a little over 17, I think, per 17 million per biennium, or per year, excuse me. And the loans they did in fiscal year 2022, they had money go out to over 230 physicians across the state. And it's because of that progressive model. It may sound like that's a lot of different people that got money, even though the number seems kind of small given how much debt you can go into for these higher level degrees. But that's because of this progressive model. So for example, for that program, if you do 1 year of service in one of these health professional shortage areas, you can get up to $30,000 or 16% of a loan repaid. The next year, after a second year of service, you'd apply again, and you could get 40,000 or 27. I may not be right on that percentage left, and it kind of continues up through those 4 years. The maximum benefit for that program, the way it's set up, is it's up to the legislature raised it, I think, not last session, but the session before, was $180,000 was the maximum benefit you could get out of that program. But it scales based on how much educational loan debt you have. The Texas Armed Services scholarship program is a little bit different. That is intended to get folks to sign up for and participate in ROTC for undergrad, as well as then you do a commitment for 4 years in paid positions in various military organizations. And so for that one maximum per year is $15,000 because it's looking more at undergraduate numbers when it comes to student debt. So I would expect that if we were doing a graduate level, we might change that number if we were looking at trying to do that kind of model. But the benefit from a time perspective would be you're getting 4-year commitments to serve in areas to be able to do the work in those places.
So, and which one are you going to model after? In other words, if I take out $150,000 in law school loans, and then I go for that 4 years, how much of that is going to be paid back?
It would be up to, you can benefit up to $180,000, so it could be the whole amount. It really just depends on, are you serving that whole time in these communities? Are you staying in these positions and these roles? One thing that's, good to note about, for example, the physicians program for the loan repayment one, is physicians don't always stay in the program for the full 4 years. They may serve somewhere for 2 years. They get potentially up to $70,000 repaid, and then they'll go somewhere else. But that does get you 2 full years of service, for example, in high need areas. And from a which model, scholarship or loan repayment, we brought them both here to you for y'all to consider and think about, just because there are two models that exist in Texas in different areas. And so it's kind of something we've seen both in Texas as well as other states have combined these types of models into fellowship programs and things like that. So there's lots of different ways you can slice the apple, as it were.
And if you all have studied this, what is staff's recommendation? Which one do you all like better? Crickets. Bueller? Bueller? All right. Well, thank you, Kristen.
Any other questions on these items, concerns, modifications?
I guess my question would be, and we're looking at this at our county for any, especially new programs, is how do you grade them? How do you gauge that they're successful? Do you have some metrics that you're putting to that to see the outcomes? And if we just start, I mean, it's a new program. Obviously, it's trying to meet a need that we've said we have, but how do we know that we're successful in that? And so if y'all, I think before we start anything, we need to define a victory and be able to use the data to prove that out or not. Obviously, it will help when we go back, if we were to start this and we got it, to go back to the ledge and say, hey, look, see what it's done. It's increased our attorneys X percent, total number this, something like that. Have y'all looked at that?
So that's a great question. The intent behind the programs, right? Like it wouldn't just be these, for example, for the internship and for the fellowship programs, those would be grants to institutional defense providers. So that's your public defender's offices, et cetera. And so we'd be able to, as part of our grants process, continue to gather data to kind of get metrics on that. We'd also want to see I think we would be wanting to measure not just did you hire an intern and put them to work, but what kind of training did you provide? Is there mentorship in place? Those types of things as kind of part of that grant, a part of building programs in these different offices. And helping kind of cover that cost. When it comes to the impact of student loan repayment, the Physicians Education Loan Repayment Program has some numbers and some data around this. They looked at it a few years ago. And there is some level of retention. They looked at both retention through the program as well as retention after the program of whether folks were staying in these areas. And the numbers, unfortunately, were really small cohorts initially. So I can't tell you that there's much data certainty in those, but I can tell you that they did run the numbers and there was some benefit to people staying through the program for the full 4 years, as well as having folks stay in these communities afterward because they had built ties in that 4 years that they were serving in those communities.
And Commissioner Covey, I would add that with either the loan forgiveness or student loan repayment or the scholarship model up front, we have the immediate return on investment with the amount of time those attorneys are staying, serving the high needs areas. And that if they stay beyond the time of the repayment, that's just an additional return on our investment that is a longer term benefit to the communities. But it would certainly immediately help with the open positions we have for attorneys in those communities.
Why is it one or the other?
Frankly, they come at the same thing from different directions. We could do both. We just simply, from the standpoint of a legislative ask, gave two potential models for the commission to consider and see which you would prefer. One's on the back end. We have, in doing some initial vetting, gotten the feedback that student loan repayment may have a harder challenge in the ledge just with national politics currently, and that the model where it's a scholarship up front and then you're getting it turns into a loan, ensures that we're going to get the return on investment back, and it doesn't potentially have some of the challenges that student loan repayment has taken on.
I would like to, I don't know if it would be possible between now and Friday, in terms of making that decision maybe, but I don't, or maybe you know the answer, Kristen. I don't know if you've had a conversation with the folks maybe at the higher ed board on the veterans program, about any difficulties they've faced in terms of like tracking those scholarship recipients. Like that's the first thing that came to my mind was like, well, how are you going to like claw that money back, or how are you going to turn it into a loan rather than loan forgiveness? It doesn't, seem that hard theoretically, but like, what's it like, when the rubber hits the road?
Sure. I can dig more into that as well. I believe it's written as a promise. It's a promissory note and there's a whole system set up there that I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to necessarily get into it right now. But I'm happy to follow up on that and kind of continue our understanding of how these different programs operate and kind of which model, or if, we wanted to try both.
All right. We had one more. We're already over time. I apologize. Operation Lone Star is very quick because, I'm sorry. There's exceptional item 5, which we haven't done, which is allowing for 6 additional TIDC employees for family protection representation and our recruiting efforts that were just outlined. Crystal, you want to go first?
Yes, and I'll try to be quick with this. So one of the requested staff we've discussed a bit earlier in my presentation is one staff member dedicated to working on Title IV funds, improving those. They would be fully dedicated to helping the counties, making sure our system is working well, and maximizing those funds as best as we can. We do think if we get money, hopefully, to help support the counties and build systems, we would need a grant specialist to support that work. If we are going to be giving counties money, we also want to begin doing, robust monitoring like we do on the criminal side. So we would need a fiscal monitor to ensure that, those funds are being expended correctly and people are reporting things right. And then we also we think we need 2 additional policy monitors so we can do some full policy monitoring and making sure that if we're giving counties funds, that the laws are being followed, and if people need help, that we can help and support them. But right now, as you all know, it's essentially me and one staff member who does about a little over half time for family rep right now. So we definitely need some more staff.
Thanks, Crystal. And Kristen, you want to talk about the 1 employee for recruitment real quick?
Sure thing. So when it comes to adding a staff member, having someone that's dedicated for recruitment, that really gives you someone who is a dedicated go-to person when folks say, hey, I want to get involved, or hey, I'm interested in public defense in Texas. Who do I talk to, right? And that's kind of the intent behind a full-time employee working on this stuff. They would be working kind of on both sides. They'd be helping build that pipeline, developing relationships also with private counsel to get folks into the work, both in the criminal and juvenile space, as well as family protection representation. I know we didn't talk a ton about that or really directly address that, but that's also an area where we really don't have enough attorneys as well. So encouraging people on that side. Also assisting counties and being able to recruit attorneys and staff for public defense offices that are in different areas is a whole other section of work by working with their leaders and the chiefs and things like that. And so really having a full recruitment campaign and putting all of the energy into it that really is necessary to fill the positions really is a full-time job. I do not just do recruitment, funny enough. I do a lot of other things here. And so I think having a dedicated staffer working on this would really help address the really dire need to address the shortages of attorneys across the state.
Thank you, Kristen. Any questions, concerns about those?
What is the total amount for this item?
Good question. We didn't put a price tag on it.
Free today only.
I wish. I would say for the family rep, this would be included in whatever we're asking for in the LAR. Whatever y'all decide you end up wanting to ask for, whether it be the full ask, 50%, 37%, we would take a portion of that and then do the math for the staff.
That's correct. I mean, the staffing component, you're right, Commissioner Covey, it costs something to hire people. In terms of the LAR itself, it doesn't require you to put a price tag on it as part of the exceptional item. But if you'd like a sense of the cost of these staff, we can put that together for you.
Well, I was just thinking, when you look at all of the exceptional items, one of them is that we're not able to continue in the vein that we started because of the shortage of funds. And so I'm just trying to see what this looks like now and going forward. And again, the sustainability of it,
Right.
not necessarily debating the need here, but how does it fit into what the ledge would give us? And then I think in general, I believe that and you probably are going to help us with this, but prioritize these items so that we don't just have a big ask with 4 things perhaps, but we have, hey, our main thing is this 1, 2, and 3, 4, however many we choose to go forward with. And that way we don't get shortchanged on something that we really have to do. So, or we really have made that a priority. Just my thought.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go to OLS real quick. Exceptional item on Operation Lone Star. What it comes down to really is we got $41 million in the last biennium. We've consulted with our partners. We anticipate funding at the current level is adequate to fund the current level of cases. And so, assuming there's no big changes, I mean, it's really hard to predict, at this point, if there's going to be a big change. But we think we have enough money next biennium, based on the current level of cases. If what we really need to know is what is the LBB going to include in our OLS funding as part of our base budget. And so if they come in lower than 41 million, then I would think we either need to put it in the LAR or go into the LAR hearing and say, hey, that's not going to cut it. We could add it at the LAR supplemental phase. I think that's in January. But that's kind of what it comes down to is what's going to happen in the base budget.
So we don't have to make a decision about that right now?
I don't think so. I mean, beyond just, well, the question then becomes, okay, they decide to give us $20 million. Well, what do you want me to do then? Do you want me to ask for the 21 million to make up the difference? Do you want we can let it ride and, submit it as part of the LAR, I said supplemental, I think it's called the LAR addendum or LAR amendments. I don't exactly remember but there is an opportunity later on in the year to amend the LAR. So we could wait until that phase too.
One way the board could think about this is to just authorize staff to continue to seek to continue to maintain baseline funding from this current biennium.
That sounds good.
Okay. All right, that is it for all of the exceptional items. And so now it's a question of I've heard the desire to maybe switch the order of items around. I've heard about the desire to reduce or maybe eliminate the item about building more funding for more rural regional public defender offices. Everyone seems to be very happy with restoring what we lost, restoring the fair defense account to the level at which it's been coming in historically, adding $12 million for that. I did not hear any concerns about there were some questions, I think, as to how the loan repayment or scholarship would operate, but I didn't hear any philosophical concerns with that item. And staff, I guess the only question is, what is the cost mainly, but it seems like there's no philosophical opposition to adding those staff.
I think somebody expressed concern because of the political stuff that's going on right now with, I guess, student loan forgiveness. But they should be accustomed to this. They do this for the doctors. They do this for the teachers. This is not a new concept, and it is not the same at all. And so I would be more in favor than that. To me, that's in the culture of immediate gratification in which we live. That would be immediate gratification to get student loan repayment and 4 years of service, or at least, whatever they decide to do, but it would be better. I don't like the loan idea at all, because I think it's we then fall into that little default area and what happens next, and then blah blah blah, and I don't like it. But so that would be my take on that particular issue. I'm all in favor of doing the same for lawyers as they do for doctors and teachers, because they do it all the time in underserved areas.
I like both ideas, and I would not be opposed to asking for money for both.
I like them both too. I think that the loan repayment is good, and there is definitely some precedent set with others. But I can tell you too, on the other route with that, you do have people who would be willing to go to law school, and I would probably be one of them. I would go to law school and come out and work for 4 years at a PDL. I would have no problem with that. My holdup for not going now is the almost $200,000 in debt I'm going to incur at almost 50 years old.
He can be our first scholarship recipient.
Hey, Scott, my question about the 12 million shortfall, if you got that back, wouldn't some of that money go toward projects to build new offices?
It would, yes.
Okay, so it's not an either or thing with those two items.
You're correct. There would be some additional funds if we restored that funding that could go towards new projects. Edwin, I don't know, what is your sense of like how close are we to like getting to that point where like all of our improvement grants are eaten up by sustainability, rural regional sustainability grants? Do you have a sense of that right now?
I mean, we have probably, at least $5 million in grants that are not sustainability, or maybe 4 million that will roll off of our outstanding obligations in the coming years. So, but we're, I mean, in some respects, if we don't get the additional money, we are just, as I said, sort of maxed out on our ability to build and take on permanent new obligations. Close to the edge.
Do y'all have any, do you have any thoughts on the order of how these should be presented?
Here's what I would do, and I'm just throwing it out there. I would make the $12 million our number one item. I think family rep should be our second item. I don't know how much to ask for, but I think we need money for it. And I would do money for, just a minute, y'all be quiet. Recruiting, third probably, and then I don't know after that.
So my suggestion also is to, we have a lot of us here, right? But we don't have as many. And so I'm hoping that on Friday in our in-person one that we have more. And we've kind of got the head start on everyone to kind of see where we are and what we're thinking. I think everybody's kind of, talking about the 12 million. I think everybody, that would be number one. But I think if we can just get, a short presentation on Friday of this whole thing, and hopefully we have, some state reps there, we have, and maybe what we need to do is have Scott kind of, make a phone call and say, hey, we're just, looking for quorum and people that are going to be there. And, we're going to be talking about this LAR, and maybe we can get a higher percentage of individuals to help us make this decision. It's my thoughts.
Let's do that. And in the meantime, those of us that have been in this meeting can give some more thought to how we think the exceptional items ought to be ordered and what they ought to be. But we're out of time, and I think that's a good idea, Judge.
Okay. Hey, also, can somebody, and I don't know if I'm just the only one that didn't get it, but can you send us everything that you put on the screen today? Because I don't have that.
We can send it again. We did send it Friday afternoon, but I will, I'll make sure that y'all get it again.
Wonder if it went to my junk email. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, we can handle things that way. We'll plan on a short presentation on what we've been through today. And we can talk about some of these unanswered questions, order, how much we want for family rep, and what, if anything, for building more offices.